Inside the stories that affect you. This is Inside KELOLAND.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Perry Groten. On today's Inside KELOLAND, we're going to take a look at the work of our KELOLAND Investigates teams and find out what goes on into our special series on cold cases in KELOLAND. Throughout the month of June, Angela Kennecke has led our coverage, taking a deep dive into local cold cases. Some are decades-old missing persons cases. Others are brutal murders that happened within the last few years. In all of these cases, we're uncovering new information that may finally help break the cases wide open. Coming up in this half hour, we'll sit down with Angela and digital reporter Ray Yost to get a look at the work behind the investigations. But first, we are focusing on another side of unsolved cases. Over the past couple of years, research and grassroots efforts have uncovered multiple issues, specifically the lack of data when it comes to cases involving missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Today, we are talking with two local women involved in the grassroots effort. Faith Spotted Eagle and Mulaney Stoneman with the Braveheart Society joins us via Zoom. Thanks for joining us on Inside KELOLAND.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I think we'll start with you, Faith. Tell us about the Braveheart Society. What is it all about?
The Braveheart Society, we call it Chanteo Hitika Okorakichia, is an old-time society. When we say Okorakichia, it's a special group of sisters. And in the old camp days, societies were created to fill niches of things that needed to be completed in the camp. So it served a purpose, and our purpose was obviously to make sure that women and children were safe and were strong in our culture.
And how do you go about advocating for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls?
I think the first step is to educate not only our people, but other people that MMIW started with contact, because many of the people that Columbus and other explorers came in contact with, they always took slaves from our people, and never were those women heard from. So it's not a new issue for us, it's generational. So it's not a new topic. We were completely aware of it as we were growing up. And it's gotten worse.
And Mulaney, you've actually been involved in some search and rescue efforts along those lines, right?
Yes, I kind of been involved for the past 5 years, kind of like boots on the ground. I'm a family advocate, with Braveheart Women's Society and Sauna Scouts of North Dakota, and we set up search teams and do grid searches and physically find our loved ones, alive or deceased.
And in fact, some of the people within your society are going through that same type of a situation, right? Tell us about that.
Yes, very recently, within the last 3 or 4 years, we had a young girl who came through our coming of age ceremony, and she was found deceased. And to this date, they have not been able to say what happened to her. And obviously someone had injured her. And I think she's an example of what happens with MMIW is oftentimes the investigation will stall or stop because they will blame it on suicide, or they'll blame it on exposure or hypothermia. And oftentimes that is not the case. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, that the coroners or law enforcement will automatically go to that, and then it's dead. So it's up to us in the grassroots to keep it alive, literally.
Melanie, what kind of emotional toll does it take on a lot of Native American families involving missing women and girls?
Well, there's a lot of barriers that communities have to overcome. Along with, the lack of communication. When a loved one goes missing, we're not supposed to know what do you do when a loved one goes missing. So that communication needs to be out there for reporting. Getting a reporting tool for them to utilize is vitally important.
And part of the problem too is we really can't get a good handle on how widespread this situation is, right?
Right. I think what happens when it goes into law enforcement, there are so many levels and hierarchies that are in existence that it becomes a closed system. And as a family member, you're sitting there grieving and emotionally wrought, and you have no idea where the investigation is and when you could be out looking for your loved one. And I think that's where the Sauna Scouts come in, is that somebody needs to be doing something, and it helps them to address their grief. And in many situations, they have found people. And so the response to be done swiftly and not marginalized is really crucial for our community. We can play a part because we know our people.
Mm-hmm. Well, Lainey, what can we do to prevent these crimes against Native women and girls on the community level, would you say?
I think community involvement is vitally important. Like when somebody does go missing, that they do respond, that they do come out and help, I'm not saying that they don't help, but I just think that, offering to help with the search and not just kind of ending it after they find that person too, because it kind of seems like it's kind of really actionary. Everyone waits for somebody to go missing and then they're all involved. I think the community needs to be very much involved on intervention and prevention measures. And just like when a girl don't come home for the weekend, that it shouldn't be just brushed off, because our women and girls are gone at higher rates than any other ethnicity, that we need to pay attention to those signs and high risk women and girls.
Yeah, why are Native women and girls more susceptible to violent crimes?
I think that we are not given the right to sometimes be considered human or important, and we get marginalized, and even to the point of grieving. Because these bodies that they're finding in Canada at the residential schools, I think it's up to 500 and some children that have been found buried and not acknowledged at these residential schools. That's our common history that we're not even allowed to grieve. And I think the crucialness of involving the Native community is that each one of us have very large kinship systems. So one person could have like 200 members in their community, and this is very different from white America. Our family systems are huge. So I could have 200 relatives that could be out on the ground and contacting other relatives. So we have large kinship systems that really could come into play and help law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what can law enforcement and governments do to change, would you say?
I would say that to look at grassroots, because we know our country, we know our spirituality, and we know our families. And so to not acknowledge grassroots is a deletion. It's erase and replace us when we've been here for centuries. So just acknowledging us that we know our people and we can help.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you both for joining us for Inside KELOLAND. Now we're going to go to take a quick break, but coming up next, Angela Kennecke will join us for a look at her work on the KELOLAND Investigates cold cases. Plus, we'll introduce you to a local author who's making it her mission to document unsolved mysteries. Okay, all right. Don't have them run away. Can I do my interview now? Okay, so I'm going to interview you two for my story for today now. Yeah, well, this won't be long at all. Let's see. So we're rolling then, Hannah. Okay. Yeah, I guess for starters, Faith. There you go. Yeah,
here I am.
Okay, you just stay there. And I want to ask you, first of all, what kind of numbers are we looking at as far as missing and murdered women and children?
I think in South Dakota, we're talking about thousands. And in Canada, of course, they've got the best stats because they've been at it longer researching. But we were sitting here, we're at a strategic planning meeting for the Braveheart Society right now at a retreat, and we're counting up the numbers in our small community. We have a small reservation of 3,000 people, and we're counting them because we'd like to begin action to do a podcast and start re-looking, like you said, the cold cases. We really need to not forget about them ever, because those families are still waiting, even if it's been 20 or 30 years. So that's what we're doing here locally, is engaging in the research and strategically planning what is best for us to do.
Yeah, well, Melina, talk about the importance of raising awareness on this issue. Tell me about that.
Well, I think there's many levels of awareness. You know, there's like you're talking about the community awareness, and then there's individual, along tied to that with MMIW is a lot of domestic violence. a lot of sexual assault, a lot of meth and, drugs and alcohol, that MMIW is kind of like an onion. You got to keep peeling it back till you get to the main core. So awareness could mean a lot of things. Awareness could be, the red shirt that I have, or like an organization, Red Ribbon Spirit Society in Rapid City. They host, prayers and bring victims in. And there's a lot of MMIW walks, a lot of runs, a lot of silent auctions. But I think the most message is to keep the people or the women that have been missing, that are currently missing. I think that to take a look at your yard, simple measures of helping with the law enforcement, to even call in to say, hey, I checked my yard in this area. We're in the vicinity, to keep a look in the side of the roads, or, culverts, to kind of be aware when somebody goes missing, not to just be submissive and, not help look.
What about, talk about your search and rescue efforts?
So with the Sauna Scouts of North Dakota, we have a lot of barriers that we have, just because we have a lot of jurisdiction issues, and we're in there to, actually help with the families. So I'm the family advocate. So I usually have the first contact with families. I have the first contact where the minute they go missing, we develop the poster. We make a missing poster, and we get all the demographics of where she was, the age, the picture. We get, formal consents to utilize all their information. And I'm the first one to make contact with the family, to meet with them, to decide what we're going to do moving forward, and kind of be a liaison person between law enforcement and the family, because there's a lot of miscommunication in law enforcement. Once it's an investigation, the family just kind of sits there and waits for them to contact them, and it's frustrating for the family because they don't hear anything. And I think it's torturing to them that, some of that needs to be, looked at as investigators, investigate, to try and make contact with the family, to give some kind of updates. Even if there is no update, I think it's vitally important to maintain that connection with the family.
Mm-hmm. Ask you, Faith, what do you think about the state of South Dakota? The legislature this year, and I think Governor Noem signed it into law, that the South Dakota is setting up an office of liaison for missing and murdered indigenous persons. What do you think about that?
I think it's been a very long road to get there, because on the grassroots level, although the publicity and the pictures that took place once the signing took place, it really happened way before that, because many of our grassroots, we were out on the lines with the man camps coming in. And the other incidents that have happened all across the state, we have been very active for years. And so it was a culmination of something that was just heart-rendering, emotional loss. And I think it was a very long time coming.
So you're encouraged by that, though, or?
I think I'm encouraged, but I also think that there's a level of cultural competence that has been achieved. If you look at the national level, there's many executive orders that have come out that people have to pay attention to social justice. And social justice means being fair to all populations. And so I think that those agencies in South Dakota need severe training on cultural competence in working with Dakota people, and that would be a first step that I would recommend.
From shows like Making a Murderer to podcasts like My Favorite Murder, being an armchair detective is a popular pastime. A Beersford woman is on a mission to document as many of South Dakota's unsolved mysteries as she can. Angela Kennecke introduces you to the local author of the upcoming 2-book series, Someone Knows.
When you look at her, you just think, oh my gosh, it just really tugs at your heart.
For the last 2 years, author Chris Weavick has been compiling dozens of local unsolved missing and murder cases, such as that of Tammy Hawes.
It's taken a lot of years to work through that anger, and the world would be better with her in it.
In 1992, the 19-year-old never returned home after a party and her body was found in a nearby ravine. Her boyfriend, Eric Stuckel, was tried and acquitted for murder. In April of this year, the FBI announced a $15,000 reward for information in her case.
For some people, like Nancy Haas, she just wants answers. She might never see justice.
Weivik is hoping her upcoming book series, Someone Knows, will prompt renewed interest in 83 cold cases and perhaps even lead to some of the mysteries being solved.
Just to get some light shining on these cases, just to make people aware of them and get people talking about them again.
Ironically, it was a cold case that was solved 43 years after 2 young women disappeared that prompted Weivik to begin her research.
We heard the story about Pamela Jackson and Cheryl Miller, and it was kind of local folklore, you know, where are these 2 girls and how did 2 girls in a car disappear? It was just so strange.
Here is the driver's license.
The car was found submerged in a creek in 2014, and authorities now believe the girls died in that crash.
And I think about Pamela Jackson's dad, who died, I think he was 102, and he died 5 days before their car was found. It's just really sad that all of those parents went to their grave never knowing what happened to their girls.
Weivik, who is a huge fan of true crime shows herself, understands the fascination and needing to know.
Death is fascinating. Death is interesting. It's compelling. People want to know what happened.
And KELOLAND's Angela Kennecke joins us now to talk about her investigative work, digging into cold cases across KELOLAND. Thanks for joining us, Angela.
You're welcome, Perry.
Well, like the author said, death is compelling, but for these cold cases, death is also bringing a lot of anguish to a lot of families in South Dakota.
It certainly does, and as I began looking into some of these cold cases, you could see the grief and just the trauma that the loved ones and friends of those involved just carry around with them for decades.
Yeah. Well, talk about some of those cases that you looked into.
Right. Well, we specifically honed in on a few cases. I didn't do this alone. Our digital team also looked at several cases. But personally, I looked at the Alicia Hummel case. Alicia Hummel was murdered at Myron Grove near Vermilion 6 years ago. And there's very little evidence that the murderer left behind. It was in broad daylight in a very short amount of time. We uncovered some evidence that hadn't been talked about before and a timeline and things that happened along the way that haven't really been covered. That was very interesting. We're hoping that by talking about these cases, it triggers something in someone. You know, someone realizes that they know something or maybe know someone who knows something and calls investigators, calls law enforcement, and gives some tips so that it may lead to a break in the case. The second case that I looked into was Wilma Nissen. And Wilma Nissen was found murdered in a ditch in Lyon County, Iowa, back in 1978. She'd been a dancer, a prostitute, a go-go girl. Some of those images have been around for years of her body in the ditch just wearing go-go boots. But her daughter came all the way from Kansas City to talk to us. She never knew her mother. She was actually adopted, but discovered her mother at about the age of 17 after she had been dead for a long time, and eventually found out what happened to her. And I talked to the retired detective in that case as well. Now, that case, there are several people that have been questioned. There's one suspect that failed a lie detector test 3 times. And there are other people that they think were involved. They think many people were involved. But they're truly waiting on technology to solve that case. They're looking for something called amplified DNA, which they have in that case, which shows several people's DNA were on the evidence. But they don't have a way to check it in the current DNA database. So they're waiting sort of for technology to catch up in this country for that.
Yeah, well, hopefully technology can solve more of these cases, right?
Yeah, we sure hope so. And it appears that that is the case oftentimes, as we've seen with some cold cases being solved through DNA or Ancestry.com or those types of things that happened. And then the third case I looked into was Elabeth Lodermeyer. And she just vanished without a trace from her Sioux Falls home in 1974. There was piece of pizza missing in the kitchen, loaf of bread had risen and fallen, and she was gone. She had been in an abusive marriage and was getting out of that marriage. Her ex-husband never admitted to the crime, but he was always the #1 suspect. He has since passed away, Gene Lodermeyer. But investigators say he also failed a lie detector test, but they never really did, or they weren't able to find a weapon or her body, and they continue to look for her body to this day.
Mm-hmm. And talk about people have come a long distance to talk to you. One would think it'd be tough to get people to open up after.
I have found, amazingly enough, and I thought that going into looking into these cold cases, that, well, who am I going to get to talk about it? Who is going to want to be interviewed and go on camera and talk about this? And I was really surprised at the number of people who couldn't wait to talk about it. And I think so much time goes by. The more time goes by, the more anxious people get just to have some kind of closures, if they can get closure, you know, some answers. And so like, as I told you with Wilma Nissen, her daughter came up from Kansas City to talk about it. The retired investigator talked about it. In the case of Alicia Hummel, we at KELOLAND News spoke to her grandmother and her sister for the first time, as well as one of her friends, and the sheriff in Clay County. And in Ella Beth Lodemeyer's case, her boyfriend, her new boyfriend at the time, she was getting divorced, and her new boyfriend came down from North Dakota to talk to us about it. And we are also covering the Dana Adamson death in Centerville from 2002. And the two retired investigators, one is the retired Turner County Sheriff and the other is a retired DCI agent, both spoke to me and gave me several details about that case that have never been made public before.
Wow. What is it? Do you feel like a detective yourself digging into these cold cases?
You know, I enjoy investigating, Perry. I think you know that.
No,
and maybe
really?
our audience knows that too. I always like to find out things that maybe haven't been uncovered before. And you just hope that that is one more piece of evidence or one more thing that can be the key to unlocking what really happened and giving people who are involved in these cases, the loved ones and the friends, some answers.
And law enforcement is willing to talk too. I mean, a lot of people might mistakenly think that the case is closed, and that's not obviously
no,
the
case.
case.
Cases are not generally closed, but they are cold. So they don't have anything necessarily new on them, but there are details that come out as the years go by. It seems like law enforcement is more willing to release more details as the years go by and no one is charged or the person isn't found. So that's been interesting too.
Do you think these cases will be solved?
Boy, I sure hope so, but I have no idea. I just really hope that a couple of the cases investigators have told me, you know, they get calls on them still, even ones from the 70s, the late 70s. They'll still hear every once in a while that, you know, somebody's thinking that they know something. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're
Angela.
welcome. You're welcome.
Well, coming up after the break, what does it take to dig into a cold case, especially when some of them happened decades ago? We'll take a look at the digital side of our KELOLAND investigations coming up next. Welcome back. Our cold case investigation during the month of June is part of a joint effort with our KELOLAND digital team. A case that still has people's attention today is the murder of Tammy Haas. Haas died in 1992. Her body was found in a ravine near Crofton, Nebraska. The case is still unsolved. A podcaster from Fargo, North Dakota said he plans to do a thorough investigation before he launches his first episode.
You have one side of people that really deserve some truth and answers. You have the other side of that deserve to be able to open up, share what they know, and get some weight maybe off their conscience or off their back, and allow them to move on with peace and some feelings of having done the right thing and some integrity.
Now, while some cold cases are fairly well known, others are not, including the death of Arden Anderson. He graduated from Langford High School in 1938 and lived on a farm in the area until his 1983 murder. Someone shot and killed the 61-year-old at a rest stop along Highway 12 near Webster, a rest stop that no longer exists. It's one of several KELOLAND.com original investigations you can find on our cold case page on KELOLAND.com. Joining me now is digital reporter Ray Yost, who's been leading up our cold case reports on KELOLAND.com. Thanks for joining us, Ray.
You're welcome, Perry. Thanks for having me.
Well, give us an idea a little bit more about the Arden Anderson case and what made that such an unusual case.
I think just that it happened in 1983 made it unusual for this time because it's so long ago. It's a little bit harder to access folks who maybe readily remembered any information about it, or even anyone who might have been working in law enforcement at the time. Some of those folks are retired, moved away, or maybe even have passed away or died.
Yeah.
So he was a creature of habits, so there's some theories that, he stopped at the same cafe each evening, made it a habit of stopping at the rest stop. So there's some theories that maybe it was someone from the community who knew him or at least was aware of his habits.
Mm-hmm. Theories, but no arrests yet.
No arrests yet.
What are law enforcement saying about that case? Do you think?
Not a lot. I think I tried several different law enforcement agencies, and unfortunately, we do have a situation there where some are retired or even have, passed away and can't provide any new light on it.
Yeah. Another interesting case is the case of John Rice. Tell us about that one.
John Rice was killed. Unfortunately, anyone who's killed is unfortunate, but his was unusual in that it appeared to be execution style. And he was found in his apartment by a friend and fellow jogger who discovered him, and they were set to go out jogging at a road race that day. And he was found in the apartment. Unusual in that police had differing theories at the time. Even in conflict with each other, it appeared from various media reports and documentation that I could find.
And this all happened in Wyoming, right?
It happened in Jackson, the city of Jackson, Wyoming, in the Jackson Hole Valley. He had moved there to Wyoming not long after graduating from college in South Dakota, and he grew up in Sioux Falls.
Yeah, and in some ways that may lend itself to the fact that this is one of those cases that aren't on a lot of people's radar anymore, right?
Yeah, I think that the time between when it happened and the distance physically all play a role in maybe the general public not having as much knowledge. Certainly his family and friends, don't stop thinking about it, but, they live in various places too. So as far as, a large group or large public eye on it, probably not.
Yeah. Well, being the digital reporter, what's it like to dive into these cold cases? Where do you start going back decades?
That's a good question, because I think part of it is you start on the internet, which has, made things much easier and difficult at the same time. So you start with name searches, and then you go to, okay, can I find a story about this, whether it's a broadcast story or a print story. I also use historical societies. Start there. They may have a archive system, or someone who's already interested in history may be able to shed some light or give you some information or direct you to a person who would call or who would talk. The other piece is law enforcement. You try to work within that and see if anyone can comment or give you or provide you any information. And then you just kind of go from there. One person may lead to another. One archive story may lead to another. People in general are helpful, or as helpful as they can be, or as comfortable as they are to help. So you start in a number of different ways, but it's a lot of phone calls, it's a lot of searching, and it's a lot of dead ends.
Yeah, it takes a lot of patience to do something like that, right?
Yeah, it does take patience, but I have a natural curiosity, so going into this, you're going to have to be somewhat patient, just because of the length of time between the actual homicide or murder to 2021. So you have to be patient, but curious and persistent.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ray. Appreciate that. And we're going to take a quick break. Coming up, we'll tell you about a state resource looking to track missing persons cases. Stay with us. You're watching Inside KELOLAND. Throughout the show, we've shown you several pictures of people who are currently missing. South Dakota's Missing Persons Clearinghouse includes more than 100 people. A majority are indigenous, and some cases go back decades. If you'd like to see the full list, there's a link on the cold case page on KELOLAND.com. And be sure to join us Monday night at 8 Central Time for a prime-time, hour-long special digging into more than a dozen cold cases from across KELOLAND. Thank you for joining us.